Hi, and thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here every Thursday, most Thursdays live, but here every Thursday nonetheless, either live or Memorex, right?
I don't think people remember what Memorex is.
Hey, don't say that. Don't say that. Our audience is hip and up
Okay.
to date, regardless of whether
Okay.
or not they're mature enough to remember that live. So, anyway, we're here live or Memorex on Thursdays, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, talking all things leadership. And today we are starting a 4-part series on decisions and decision making. So, I'm thinking.
You're deciding.
I'm deciding, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Have you ever thought about how you make decisions? I'm pretty sure Robert has because he's super self-aware.
Usually when they go wrong.
Right? And I think that's probably the case. Most of us have never probably been taught how to make decisions. We just find ourselves making decisions. And then we find ourselves in positions of leadership, making decisions not just for ourselves, for other people, and for the organizations that we work for. And we haven't really stopped to think about whether or not our process, our decision making process, is effective, efficient, the best way, a good way, or if it's just a way, right? Or why it even matters that we make decisions and how we make decisions. So that's what we're going to talk about today in the next 3 weeks. We are going to spend some time today sort of laying the groundwork for decisions. And then over the course of the next 3 weeks, we'll get more in depth in terms of how to actually make those decisions, right? What's some strategies that you can use? There are methods that can help you make better decisions. So we'll talk about some of those methods, some of those strategies, how you can improve your decision-making ability. And I'll provide this caveat. That's not going to mean that every decision that you make from here on out will be perfect. There are no perfect decisions in the long run. They are best decisions for the moment in which you're making the decision, right? Because there are variables. And as things change, a good decision or a decision that worked well today may not work well a year from now because the variables around the decision will change. Maybe what you're looking for, the outcome that you want, has changed. And here's a perfect example. As we have moved into this place with, if you're paying any attention in the home buying market, right? Right now, interest rates are pretty high. The values of homes have dropped precipitously because of the rise in interest rates. And whether or not now is a good time for you to buy or sell depends on factors that are uniquely yours, right? It might be a good time for me to buy and sell, buy and or sell, but for Robert, it's not. He's in a different part of the country than I am. There are all sorts of other variables, visions that we have for our lives and things that we want. And all of those things matter, right? And just as those sorts of factors matter in your leadership journey, So what we can do for you is help you to develop a process that allows you to be more present, more aware, to take into consideration things that maybe you have not taken into account before. But know that the decisions that you make, the best really that you can hope for is that the decisions that you make work for the situation in which you find yourself currently. So, Robert, some opening thoughts.
Well, yeah, those are great opening thoughts from you. I think that your question when you asked, "Have you thought about how you make decisions?" is really a really good one, because most people just make decisions, especially from a leadership perspective, because they think that they're the only one that can make the decision. And a lot of leaders get themselves in trouble because they only look at their own perspective. And I think that's going to be something that we talk about
Yeah.
as we, dig into how to make decisions and decision making processes. So really just really consider how you go about making your decisions and the why of it. Why are you making decisions the way that you are? Do you feel that you're the only person that can make the decision? Do you think you're the most qualified? That could be something that we can talk about, and that's probably going to come up as well too.
Absolutely. We're gonna go deep. All right. We've got 4 episodes dedicated to this. So we're going to go deep. Again, we'll talk about today we're going to talk mostly about what decisions are, decision making is, and why it's important. Next week we'll get into some strategies for you. Then we'll talk about obstacles, right? What gets in the way of you making decisions? And there are, you might not think about it, you might not have thought about it, but there are reasons that we don't make decisions. And I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. Not making a decision is making a decision.
Yeah,
So
inaction is actually inaction. It's an action.
it is absolutely an action. And so, and then we'll talk about exactly that, taking action. Your decision making process isn't really complete until you do something with it, right? Otherwise, they're just thoughts in your head. So let's start at the beginning. What is a decision? What is a decision? And it is simply the act of making up your mind, right? Having firmness of purpose or character, or making a determination about something. It's the action or process of deciding something or of resolving a question. And the reason that decision making is so important is because it's a foundation of problem solving. Right. And you may not think of everything you do as a problem, but in some respect it is. And so I want to ask you this, and I'm going to ask Robert this as well. What was the very first decision you made today?
To get out of bed. The very first decision I made today was to get out of bed.
And that's probably the first decision a lot of us make, right? Whether or not to get up or hit the snooze button, right? Especially this time of year as it starts to get colder. It was like, do I want to get up? Do I want to get out of bed? And the beauty of my morning is I can start my morning in bed. So I can make a decision to actually stay in bed and get my morning started, which is a great thing. It gives me a little more time to stay bundled before moving on. But everyone doesn't have that ability, right? Some people have to get up. They've got to get the kids ready. I know you've got kids in the house that go to school age children in the house. So, getting up in the morning, you may think, I don't really have a choice but to get up. But the reality is you do have a choice. Even if it feels like, oh, I have to get up because I have to get the kids up. I have to get dressed into the office, you have a choice not to go. Right. And so if I could impress upon you anything in the course of today, and as we move over the next few episodes on this topic, is that being in the present, being mindful of the choices that are before you, and that everything you do results from a decision that you make consciously or unconsciously. Right? And being more aware in the moment is going to help you in the long run to make better decisions because you are aware. And it's really easy to get in the, to be our lives unfold on autopilot. And there are reasons for that, and there are good reasons for that. But the question is that the best way for you to live your life? And in particular, and what we're concerned about here on the state of leadership, is that the best way for you to be leading other people? Right? If you're doing it on autopilot. And so studies have shown that we make, on average, like 35,000 decisions each day. 35,000. That's a lot of freaking decisions.
Well, yeah, and a lot of those are really determined by our mental models, right? We talked about this in one episode where we have this already preloaded set of actions that we can take based on our mental models. You meet someone new, you have a mental model for, whether or not you stick out your hand and introduce yourself. You have a mental model as to whether or not you're going to bring a gift over to a friend when they buy when they have a new house or they are renting a new apartment. So a lot of those decisions they are more or less autopilot because you have those mental models stacked up and ready to be put into the cartridge, so you don't have to think about them. But a lot of times those mental models can backfire if you don't have the proper information to choose the best option in that moment.
And so it becomes a balancing act of when to go with habit, the mental model that's already there, right? And when to question that to make sure that you are actually taking into account the data, the feedback that you need in order to make the best decision for this moment. Right. And it's interesting. I remember when we had that conversation, and one of the examples you brought up was the one about going to someone's house and whether or not to take a gift. And I remember as a kid, my father telling me, you never go to anyone's house without taking something, right? He did not specify that it had to be something that cost money. Right? Or that it had to be something, huge. It could have been a flower, right? It could have been a card. But you a bottle of wine, right? You ask, can I bring a dish? Whatever it is that you take something. And I find myself every time I'm going to someone's house sort of running through all the possibilities of things that would be appropriate to take or not to take. Right. And so it sets us up. Again, some of these 35,000 decisions are minor, right? Whether or not to take a hot shower this morning or a cold shower. Right. Whether or not to have peanut butter and jelly or a ham sandwich for lunch, right? Some of the decisions are not life death decisions. They're just decisions that you have to make. And, speaking of mental models, the thing that was started, I think it was started sort of in the Silicon Valley and tech industry. It may have been something before that. Certainly in other industries, it's happened in different ways, but like Steve Jobs and others wearing the same thing every day. right? And so what that does for them is it frees them up to use their mental capacity on the things that matter. And so the question is, are you saving your mental capacity for the things that matter? That the things that matter to your team, the things that matter for your organization. Are you bringing your best thinking and decision making processes to that? And how do you know is ultimately the question. How do you know if you are not aware of how you make decisions, or if you're consciously even making decisions?
There's so many parts of that. As you were talking, I was thinking of a CEO that I know that would, a former CEO, that would make decisions and not really care how, because they were like, look, if it's money, it's only money. And, and it was very interesting because most of the ramifications weren't going to touch him.
Right.
Wasn't going to touch him. So he really didn't care. It was really interesting. And I'm not making a judgment. I just think it's fascinating the way he thought about it. It's kind of like, well, it's just money. It's like, well, right, it's not going to affect your salary. It's going to affect somebody else's.
Exactly.
It was very interesting to see how this person operated. I remember having a conversation with them about poor customer service in a portion of the organization. And his response to me was, well, I don't experience that. And I was like, of course you don't. You're not going to experience poor customer service. You're the CEO of the organization. So, and it was very interesting how he was using that, again, not a judgment, to filter his experience.
Right.
So he could tell everybody, hey, look, I made these decisions. They're great decisions. I have this organization. It's fantastic. Service is tremendous. Of course, he was getting tremendous service. He was making decisions that everyone was praising, even though I know that on the back end, they really weren't praising them. They were, because they would complain about them to me. But I just thought it was very interesting to see that. So that's the other thing I think to include with this. How much of your ego is involved? And the other part is, how much compassion do you have when you're making a decision? I'm not saying this person was devoid of compassion, but it didn't go into his decision making. He was like, I want to do this, and it's going to happen. And if it fails, it's just going to cost us money.
I find that fascinating.
It really was. I mean, it was,
because, like you said, it doesn't affect you. It affects, so when someone asks for a raise and you say, well, we don't have any money for raises. Well, because you've made decisions that allowed you to just waste money. Exactly. Because your idea is that it doesn't matter. It's just money. But right. It matters to someone, which is another point about decision making, is that and why it's important for you to be aware of what you decide. Your decisions move you somewhere, right? Your decisions affect other people. Your decisions set examples and sends a message to those that you lead and others who are watching about what your values are, what your priorities are, right? And often we think if we're not saying words that we're not communicating, when in fact, every decision you make sends a message. It's communicating something. And you have to ask, are my decisions communicating to those that I'm leading and those that are watching? Am I communicating what I want to be communicating?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right on that, right on point.
So just a real simple example, Robert's given some good ones, but a simple example in this is if you snap at someone in a meeting who comes in late, Is that the example that you want to set about how you handle your frustrations, right? Right? It's not about the person being late. Well, it could be about the person being late, but it's not really about the person being late. It's about you're frustrated about something someone else has done. And yes, their decision has an impact on what's happening in the meeting. But your decision to snap has an impact on the meeting as well. And maybe your decision to respond the way you did, to react the way you did, sends a bigger message, right? And particularly if you're in leadership, right? If you're the leader, it sends a message about how, one, how you respond to things, and two, it sends this message of how you are not necessarily good with your emotional intelligence.
Well, a couple of things. Well, you know that they've done studies, and CEOs usually have less emotional intelligence than other people. It's the truth. I mean, remember, these are not judgments. This is empirical. Because they don't need it. They don't need it. They just.
But they do.
They do, but they don't feel they do. They plow through. They make decisions. People, the royal court is in order, and they, will many times agree with the CEO, no matter whether it's a bad decision or not. So that's the data. But I think it's really interesting, and this is not empirical. This is anecdotal. I don't have, but I'm sure we can find some research on this. It's been my experience that the way the CEO handles those types of situations, you talk about, losing your temper when somebody goes to a meeting late. It's been my experience that if the CEO does that, nearly everybody that works underneath them is going to respond in that way, more or less. It becomes the culture. It's the speed that the team follows. And I've seen that.
Right, that's the setting example part.
Exactly. That example part. And so when we talk about decisions, it's that as well. Are you shooting from the hip? Then your team's going to shoot from the hip more than likely. It's just a very interesting thing, and we should just, we can do a whole series on CEOs as well. Some of the great CEOs that are out there, and some of the ones that are, struggling but trying to be better, and some of the ones that we know are not as great. So, really good points about those examples and how your decisions can cascade into other parts of your leadership.
And so if you were thinking, my flying off the handle or my snapping wasn't a decision, I just want you to take a step back and really connect with the definition that is absolutely what a decision is. And it's not just, big ticket items, right? It's the process, again, of deciding something. And so you've decided that the way to respond, and maybe this is something that you picked up somewhere else, maybe it's something you've created on your own, but it's exactly what it is. It's a decision, and this is why it's important for you to know how you make decisions and why these are important. Again, your every decision you make shows your values, it shows your priorities, it demonstrates that to other people. And so you want to pay attention to that, because as Robert just mentioned, it can start to create the culture, right? Because other people are paying attention, and you are influencing others about what we do and what's okay in making choices.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I just think that there's so many things that popped into my head when you started talking about that and how it affects leadership. And I remember this CEO, now that I'm thinking about this, was one of those folks that usually very even-tempered, but when he lost his temper, it was volcanic. explosive, energetic. People would scurry, and the person that was getting the brunt of it would just stand there, uh, frozen like a deer in the headlights. And I remember one of his direct reports decided that they were going to try that with me. And it was very interesting because he just stood there and watched my reaction. And I just went, that's not going to happen. It's like, whatever diatribe or screaming thing you think you're that, I'd rather not do this right now. If we can talk about it, but no. It was very interesting. And then after I did that, he came in and was like, yeah, Robert's right. It was really interesting to watch him do that. It's funny. But
I'll say it's interesting that you responded that way, because I get often from clients who are not currently in let's say, a position of leadership. They don't feel like they have the efficacy, right? They don't have the self-efficacy to stand up for themselves, which is, again, a decision. So they feel like I can't say anything. And if you find yourself saying you can't, right? If you say you can't, then just know, again, it's a choice. It's a choice. And we are going to be talking about the things that need to be part of your calculus when making a choice, when making a decision, and consequences, repercussions, penalties, punishments, all of that are part of the decision-making process, right? Absolutely. So, but you have to decide, and only you get to decide. And so if it means when the alarm goes off in the morning, instead of wasting any energy deciding whether to get up or not, the alarm went off, just get up and go, right? Those sorts of decisions that are before you, you make them and take action so that, again, you can free yourself to have the mental capacity that you need to make the major decisions when they come along. And, as I was reading about these 35,000 decisions that happen every day, there are, they say, somewhere around 70 or so, right? So a couple dozen decisions that matter. So out of the tens of thousands that you're deciding consciously, unconsciously, habitually, autopilot, and the like, there are some that are vital each and every day, around 70 or so. And the question is, are you letting those slide? Are you giving those all the attention that they need? And so we're going to wrap up today. And after Robert gives his closing thoughts, I'll share a little bit about where we're going with the other three parts of this series.
My final thought is really my definition. It's a little different than yours, but it still applies. Is a decision is choosing the best option based on the information that you have. And I think that is the key. What information? Do you have the best information? And so I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely. And that will go towards the sort of that the decision that you make today is the best, with your definition, the best decision you can make today. A year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you may make a totally different decision, or you may find yourself today making a totally different decision than one you made 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That's on the same topic, right?
Half of married people.
On that note,
based in statistic. There it is.
And everyone who's ever probably started and left a job, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. The decision that you made to take a job in a particular place, right? A year later, you're like, why? right? I had options. Why did I choose that one? And I think what's really important is whether or not it really is the best decision with everything that you have to just trust that it is. Otherwise, you drive yourself crazy with the what ifs, the regrets, and there's nothing you can do about decisions you made in the past.
Absolutely.
Right? You can't change any of those. So just trust that you did the best you could with what you had at the time. And if you want to make better decisions in the future, watch us over the next 3 weeks, because we are going to be talking about, we're going to address next week being intentional and strategic, right? How to actually make these decisions. And we're going to discuss some decision making strategies. There are some models out there that can help you run through the considerations that you need to consider. In part 3, we'll talk about the obstacles to deciding, those things that get in our way of making decisions, whether at all, or making good decisions, right? A lot of people
Absolutely.
don't make good decisions, and try not to be judgmental about it, right? It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's really, is it the best decision that you can make in this moment? And then the last one is that it really isn't a decision until you take some action. Right?
Absolutely.
And what that action is. And so that is our path forward. And we look forward to seeing you next week when we will be talking strategy and process. So thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We will see you next week, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. If there's any way that we can be of service to you between now and next week, please reach out by email. Let Robert or I can't talk. Robert or I let us know, and we would be happy to have a consultation with you to talk about how we could be of service to you. So until next time, take care.
Bye now.